Hey everybody, it's Rachel. Welcome back to the channel. So, I try to be a better person every day. Seriously, I do. Lately, I have been starting my mornings with something called meditation. Loving kindness meditation. Something I started trying again when I started following the monks on their walk for peace. Now, I am not telling anyone they need to go meditate every day. That's not your thing. This is just something that I do to keep my stress levels down, because chronic stress is brutal on the body. But turns out it's not going very well. If you are not familiar with meditation, the idea is kind of simple. You sit quietly and intentionally generate these feelings of compassion. At first you send them inwards towards yourself. Things like, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I be peaceful, may I be happy. Whatever you want. Then you start sending those same wishes outward, toward someone you love, then toward someone neutral. And eventually, you're supposed to direct those same wishes towards somebody you actively struggle with, someone you don't like, someone you disagree with. And every single time I get to that part, I hit a brick wall. Head first, every single day. Because there are some people I just cannot do that for. I have tried. But I'm supposed to sit there and wish them health, happiness, and peace, and I can't do it. There's no maybe someday. No, I'm working on it. I just can't. If I'm being completely honest, what shows up instead is pretty much the exact opposite, directed at them and the people holding them up. And somehow, I don't really feel bad about admitting that. I know, not very enlightened on my part, but at least I'm being honest. Now, hold that thought for a second, because I get these daily philosophy emails, and a few days ago, the one that showed up was by Carl Jung, and it sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole, because, that's just what my brain does. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the more I read about what he meant by that, the more interesting it got, because Jung believed something that most of us really don't like hearing. He believed ignoring our darker impulses doesn't make them disappear. It usually just makes them stronger. So, that quote had been bouncing around in my head. Then the next morning, I did my meditation again, ran into that exact same wall again. Then I took Reggie out for his walk, and I hit play on my playlist. The first song that came on was The Sound of Silence, the version by the band Disturbed. And that opening line comes on. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. And suddenly it was like, holy crap, that's it. And in that second, it all clicked in my brain. The meditation wall, the Jung quote, and those lyrics. Now, I have known that song most of my life, of course. The original Simon and Garfunkel version is great. But the Disturbed version, that one hits differently. If you haven't heard it, give it a listen. Even Paul Simon loves it. Anyway, shocker, I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, those lyrics made the Jung quote completely click, because Jung believed that every human being has what he called a shadow. The shadow is basically the parts of ourselves that we'd rather not admit are there. Anger, jealousy, resentment, cruelty, hatred even. Stuff that doesn't exactly match the image we'd like to present to the world. Jung wasn't saying that we should embrace those things or act on them. That is not the point. The point is that pretending those parts of us don't exist doesn't make them disappear. It just locks them in the basement, like a hostage. And the longer something stays locked in the basement, the angrier it gets. And suddenly we're the psycho upstairs pretending everything's fine. Which made a lot of sense with that wall I keep hitting during those meditations. Because that anger that's showing up, that is the shadow knocking on the door. And once you understand that, the world suddenly makes more sense. Jung also said something else that stuck with me. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. I think what he meant by that was pretty simple. The harder we try to see ourselves as completely good, the more the stuff we don't want to admit about ourselves gets pushed out of sight. Not because we're monsters, most of us anyway, but because we're human. Humans get angry and resentful and jealous. We get scared. Hatred shows up sometimes too, whether we like it or not. That doesn't mean we're supposed to embrace it. It means pretending it's not there doesn't solve anything. Because we can't fix anything in ourselves if we keep lying to ourselves about the fact that it exists. You know, Jung never believed the goal was to become this perfectly good person. In fact, he thought that that idea could actually be dangerous. Because sometimes when people are convinced that they are the good ones, they stop looking at themselves at all. What he wanted instead was just awareness. Just the honesty to say, yep, anger shows up in me. Resentment shows up. Hatred can show up. Not so we act on it or excuse it, just so we see it clearly before it starts making our decisions for us. Because when people convince themselves, I don't hate people, I don't have anger, I'm always compassionate, that's when things start going sideways. That is when people can end up doing some pretty ugly things while they believe they're still the good guys. And this isn't just something that happened in the past. It happens over and over again. It's happening now. And honestly, it's louder right now than it's been in a long time. Because when people feel scared or threatened, that is when the shadow starts looking for somewhere to land. And it almost always lands on somebody else, some other group, some other belief, some other people who get labeled as the problem. That is shadow projection, and that is what Jung was warning about. And that's also why that song hit me a little bit differently that time around. Because the more I listened, the more I realized the whole thing is basically about disconnection. People talking, but not really communicating. Hearing, but not actually listening. Everyone performing, nobody really connecting. And that felt weirdly kind of familiar, because that's exactly what a lot of this feels like. Like we're all living in the same place, but not that same reality. Now, Paul Simon probably wasn't sitting there at 21 thinking about Carl Jung and the psychology of the shadow, but he nailed something that Jung warned about. What happens when people stop paying attention to themselves or each other and to what's actually happening around them? That is when things start going wrong. And then that line in the song, silence like a cancer grows, that one hit me in a few different ways. Because silence can mean refusing to look at the darkness in ourselves, and it can mean refusing to call out the darkness we see in the world. But both of those things let it grow. Jung's warning was basically this: the danger isn't that darkness exists. The danger is pretending you don't have any. Because once people convince themselves they're completely right, completely good, completely justified, they stop questioning themselves. And that is when the shadow really starts running things. The uncomfortable part? Some people see that darkness and they deal with it. They question themselves. They wrestle with it. And they try not to let it run their life. And some people don't. Some people are perfectly happy letting the anger lead, or the fear, or the resentment, sometimes even the hatred. And if we're being honest, a lot of what we're watching play out right now is exactly that. But, good news, something else is happening too. More and more people are starting to notice it. They're seeing the pattern and deciding they don't want to be part of that. Which brings me right back to those meditations in that wall. I realized the point of that moment isn't to force compassion onto somebody else when I just can't. I think the point is noticing what's actually there in me. Because when I hit that wall every morning and I realize I cannot wish certain people well, I can at least see what's happening in me. So what do I do with that? I turn it back onto myself. Because right then, I'm the one suffering. The anger, the frustration, that knot in my gut when I think about certain people or what's going on in the world. That's the suffering. And I think that's where Buddhism and Jung actually come together. Both of them believed awareness is where the work starts. It's not enlightenment, no, but it's clarity. Not pretending we're perfect, not pretending we don't have a shadow. Just being honest enough to see it so it doesn't end up running the show. The real danger isn't darkness. It's pretending we don't have any. And that is something we all have to work on. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care of you, and I will see you the next time. Bye-bye.